Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Charmed Season 4, Episode 10, Trial by Magic. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So, this episode centers around Phoebe, who we learn has gotten jury duty, and she believes at first that the defendant is guilty and is looking forward to getting some kudos for punishing evil because normally they don't, as they do it in secret as witches. However, at the trial, when they are passing around a piece of evidence, Phoebe gets a premonition of the past, which shows that the murderer actually is somebody else, as the defendant had been claiming. And so she then, when the jury goes to basically close doors to have to vote on a verdict, she ends up having to stall for time and calls Leo to the bathroom to basically take her back to the manor, where she enlists Piper and Paige's help in finding the real murderer while she again goes back and stalls for time. Which of course annoys all of the other jurors who, much like she was at the start of the episode, are all very convinced of the defendant's guilt. And then the second part of the episode is that Piper and Paige have to go and find the real killer. Meanwhile, Paige's friend from A Night to Remember, Glenn, has come back from Australia, and she invites him to stay at the manor where, when he's left alone, he finds out about magic, and she ends up casting a spell on him, which ends up making him be able to stretch, though they don't really do much with that throughout the episode. And then he ends up essentially learning their secret. Piper and Paige go to confront the real murderer, and they do get a taped confession. However, they're not going to be able to get it to Daryl in time to exonerate the defendant. However, Phoebe comes up with a plan to prove to the jury that magic can exist and that the defendant can have a gift of premonition, and that's how he found the body. And so, with the help of Piper and Paige, they summon the victim's ghost, who then is able to tell the jury who killed her, that it wasn't her ex-husband, and what it was that she found that ended up with her dying. And so the entire jury declares him innocent, and they are all then memory dusted by Leo to make them forget about magic. Meanwhile, the rat demons, who are actually behind the human killer, kidnap Glenn in order to make the sisters give them the tape. So Paige and Leo go above the main rat demon's head to his bosses to basically say, we're going to expose your entire operation if you do not let my friend go. And so the bosses agree, and they vanquish the main rat demon at the club, which then leads to the main bosses of the rat demon from the pier letting Glenn go, saying that they'll call it a draw this time, and leaving. And the episode concludes with Paige's friend Glenn going to stay with a different friend rather than at the manor, because that's obviously dangerous for him, but they do allow him to keep the memory of magic. As Piper says, that way Paige will have at least one person outside of the family that she can talk to should she need to, and as Paige implicitly trusts Glenn completely, they're willing to trust him too. And that is our happy ever after ending. So now that we've been reminded about what happened, it is now time to rank the episode, and we'll be ranking on our mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So, starting off, we have our single episode supporting character introductions. First, we have the jurors, which majority of them are unnamed. I think only one of them is named, which is Tanya, and she is named when Phoebe asks about the angel pin that she has on her lapel to try to say like how magic is something that is felt but not seen. Then we have, so I'm lumping them all together because they weren't really named, but they were obviously pretty important supporting characters to the episode. Worth 1 point, 1 point for Stan Provazzoli, who is the defendant, and then his ex-wife, the victim, Angela Provazzoli, is summoned, which is another 1 point. Andrew Wyke is the human killer with a Medusa tattoo on his arm, worth 1 point. And then we have, again, I'm lumping them all together because there are too numerous to count and none of them are really given a first name, but they are a category of demon, which are the rat demons, also worth 1 more point, bringing us up to 5 total so far. Then we have a positive 2 points, bringing us to 7 for our multi-episode supporting character development, and this, of course, is Glenn returning from Australia and finding out about magic while he stays at the manor. Then we have, finally, for positive points, plus 4 points for the multi-season main character development, which is Phoebe getting jury duty and using magic to prove the innocence of the defendant. And that brings us up to, I believe it's 11. Yep, 11. And then we do have some negatives for this episode. First negative, worth -2, is that despite their very poor history letting a bunch of random people know about their magic, Phoebe decides to reveal magic to the entire courtroom. Luckily, she's only allowed to do so once Leo promises to use the memory dust on them to make them forget after they vote innocent. However, it is still a very big risk and something that we have learned in several episodes that they should not do, and it has had devastating consequences in several episodes. So I just feel like it's an example of like never learning your lesson, really. But in this case, it does end up working out. Still wanted to mention -2 points though. And then the second -2 points is for Glenn's snooping, or in other words, his invasion of privacy. You know, Paige lets him into the house, lets him stay there, and trusts him to be alone in the house while she is away. And then when she comes back, she finds that he's been going through the house, looking at things, going into rooms that he maybe shouldn't have, finding the Book of Shadows. And frankly speaking, in this case, it's not just Paige's house, it's her sister's too. So while Paige may be fine with him going through like her room, or maybe like him, maybe being in the public areas of the house, for him to go into more private areas of the house and snoop around and find things that may not necessarily be Paige's to find, but could invade Piper or Phoebe's privacy as well, is what I have the problem with. And so that is why it is a -2. And then the last thing, this is where the bias and judgment come into play because some people might disagree, but I felt like the plot of this episode was weak. Like I felt like it didn't really entertain me. I was kind of bored throughout it. I didn't find it compelling. Glenn finding out about magic was inevitable, but it was also a very small background part. They had Glenn like stretching because of a spell that Paige cast on him to stretch his imagination to try to help him accept magic as being real, even though she literally could have just called anything and it shows up in her hand in a bunch of bright blue orbs and that'd probably have done it. She decides to cast a spell. He stretches. They don't even do anything with that in the episode, so it kind of feels like a pointless thing. Like, why did they bother to make him stretch? And of course, like, again, the jury exposing magic. And true, Phoebe did try everything else, even giving like a history lesson on magic and the origins of magic and history of magic to try to convince them it could be real. But again, like that was a lot of, time that she had to spend stalling, and that was also kind of boring for me because I was being stalled as the audience member. It just kind of, for me, fell very, very flat as far as a plot concept, and there weren't really any lessons to be learned there. The only thing that really the episode accomplished was Glenn being let in on the secret, which again was very background part of it and probably could have been discovered at another time, maybe with a more interesting main plot. So That being said, I did take 4 points for that, which did leave this at an objective 3 points out of 10. And so our mostly objective ranking so far has in first place Charmed Again, Hell Hath No Fury, Enter the Demon, A Night to Remember, A Page from the Past, Size Matters, Brain Drain, Muse to My Ears, Black as Coal, and then this episode currently is 10th place, Trial by Magic. Now, my personal ranking. I think I said it in the objective ranking when I was explaining the weak plot concept, but I didn't find much about this episode compelling. I didn't find it entertaining. I didn't think it taught a lesson or had much of a purpose. The only thing that it may have had as a purpose is Glenn being let in on the secret, but again, they could have done that any other way with a more interesting plot. Like, it didn't have to be, the boring plot that it was. And again, they made him stretch. There was no reason for him to stretch. And because he was so background in the episode, only getting like a few minutes of screen time, it was almost like, was there even a point to it? So it did feel very lackluster as an episode. And because this is my favorite series of all time, I don't necessarily hate any episode except for one, which is The Fourth Sister. I hate that episode. But I don't really hate any other episodes, but I still decided that this one, because it was so lackluster, because I didn't really see the point, because it didn't really do anything for me, I did decide ultimately to give it a 1 out of 10. And so we have our personal rankings as follows: Hell Hath No Fury, Charmed Again, A Night to Remember, Size Matters, Muse to My Ears, A Page from the Past, Brain Drain, Enter the Demon, Black as Coal, and then this episode is for me also in last place, Trial by Magic. Which now brings us to the series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, Season 3 is in first with 76.36%, Season 2 in second at 75%, and Season 1 in third place so far at 73.18%. Season 4 so far has a score of 78 out of a possible 210. Meanwhile, on my personal ranking side, we have Season 3 in first place with 76.82%, Season 1 in second at 71.50%, Season 2 is in last place by a rather large margin at 56.82%, and then Season 4 so far has a score of 57 out of a possible 210. But with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Charmed Season 4, Episode 10, Trial by Magic. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.